UFC Vegas 93 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. We're going to kick things off in the featherweight division as Mel Costa is a minus 198 favorite. The comeback on Shailin Nurdanbieki is plus 164. And I like the Costa side in this matchup. That was my first bet of the week. I backed him at the money line at minus 170. And I just think he's going to have multiple advantages in this matchup. For starters, on the feet, I expect Costa to have a clear striking advantage. He's much more technical, much more measured in his approach. He's got powerful leg kicks, good boxing as well, solid defensively. And I think his takedown defense and his scrambling ability is going to be underrated in terms of how the market views this type of matchup, because the only time we really ever saw him get out grappled was that Thiago Moises fight. But you have to remember, that was his UFC debut. He was up a weight class on short notice. And honestly, I thought fundamentally he looked pretty solid there. You know, he made Moises work for those takedowns. He scrambled back to his feet at times as well. And I just think there's a big difference between a bigger fighter in Moises, bigger than Nurdanbieki, and much faster. Moises was able to get to positions on Costa because of how quick his entries were, transitioning to the back, stuff like that. Nurdanbieki is nowhere near the type of grappler to that level of a Thiago Moises, and I just think he's very one-dimensional. He doesn't have much in terms of his striking outside of his pure power, but he gets pretty sloppy. He can be hit, and I just think he has to get this fight to the ground, and I think he's going to struggle to do that. And even if he does, I think Costa could potentially out-scramble him. So give me the favorite here in Mel Costa. I think he gets his hand raised. We're going Costa by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up is in the women's strawweight division as Josephine Knudsen is a minus 192 favorite. The comeback on Julia Pilastri is plus 160. And this is a solid matchup between two former Dana White's Contender Series fighter. Pilastri actually fought twice on Contender Series. She fought Jasmine Jasudavicius initially, where she struggled in the clinch. She struggled in the grappling department, and she ended up losing to Jasmine in that fight. But she went back to the regional scene, rattled off a couple wins, seems to have made improvements in her grappling, and then she got the call back on Contender Series as a big favorite and got the job done. So now she's making her UFC debut, but I think she could potentially struggle against Josephine Knudsen. Knudsen's very well-rounded fighter. She trains out of All Stars Gym in Sweden with Hamzat Chimaev and a couple other people, but she's just very well-rounded. You know, she's not going to put a ton of volume out there on the feet, but she's very technically sound. She's able to control her opponents up against the fence, and that's typically where she looks to mix in the wrestling. She's not a super high-level wrestler, but she is capable of landing multiple takedowns. And I think in a fight like this, where I do expect it to be somewhat competitive, I think the control time, the takedowns, and just the overall well-roundedness of Knudsen's approach is going to be the difference maker here. So we're going Knudsen by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup as Jekka Seregi is a minus 355 favorite. The comeback on Weston Wilson is plus 280. And this is probably my favorite fight to target on DraftKings. We have 13 fights this weekend. I think this is the best one because I think this one has the highest likelihood to end inside of round one. So regardless of who wins, I would expect the winner to score very well and compete for the optimal lineup. And it's for a couple of reasons. For starters, Jekka Seregi, very, very reckless style of fighter, but he swings with big power. And that type of fighter is always going to have first round knockout upside, especially when you match him up with somebody in Weston Wilson who gets hurt a lot. He eats clean punches. He's been knocked out in both of his UFC performances so far. He's 0-2 in the UFC and was knocked out in the first round in both of them. But I don't want to just completely write him off because let's look at who he was matched up against. He made his short notice debut against Joe Anderson Brito, and he got his bell rung, got knocked out, no surprise there. He follows that up with his next fight against Gene Silva, who's another very explosive, very powerful fighter who dropped him multiple times, and he took an absurd amount of damage in that fight as well. So the guy gets hit a lot, he takes a ton of damage, and he usually is too tough for his own good. So even both of those knockouts, he was, you know, still trying to fight rather than just being knocked out cold immediately. So he took kind of some unnecessary type of damage. So I worry about the durability. But again, I don't want to completely write him off because Weston Wilson is a very tricky submission grappler. That's his game. That's what he's going to try to do, is wrap up an arm, take the fight to the ground, do something to force a grappling exchange where he will have the submission grappling advantage, especially against somebody in Sergey who's a one-dimensional power striker who's been submitted before on the regional scene. So it's one where I think the field's just going to be, you know, making Sergey chalky, which I get it. I'm going to play a lot of Sergey myself. But I think where the field is going to play this wrong is they're just going to write off Weston Wilson as, you know, this is just a jobber that's going to get knocked out in the first round. Now, while that could happen, and maybe it probably does here, I just think he has more of a chance than the field is going to treat it in order to pull off that first round submission. So it's one that I'm going to be heavy on both sides. Obviously, you're getting more leverage on Wilson, so maybe I'll root more for him. But regardless, I just want this fight to end inside the first round. We're going Sergey by TKO round 1. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Gabriel Fernandez, a minus 155 favorite now. The comeback on Carly Judas is plus 130. We've seen significant line movement in favor of the underdog in Carly Judas here. And I got to be honest, I wanted to be in on it. I just, personally, I couldn't get there just because she doesn't have the ground game that I think you need to take advantage of a Gabriel Fernandez. We know Fernandez is a great striker, very powerful on the feet. She's going to stay active with the leg kicks. She has zero ground game. You can take her down. You can control her. We saw that in her debut against Jasmine Jasudavicius, and we saw that in her follow-up performance against Teresa Bleda, where she nearly came back and got the finish late, but still, you know, she's dropping rounds because she's being taken down and being controlled. Judas doesn't have that type of game. You know, Judas is a very, you know, green. She just turned pro a couple years ago. Very low-level boxer. And now her boxing is good, so I don't want to discredit her completely. You know, she fought on Contender Series against Kariskate, and they, like, broke the record for most significant strikes landed, where they just both bit down on the mouthpiece and went to war. And I could see something similar happening here. So I get why people want to be interested in the underdog, but I just think the skill discrepancy between the two when the fight plays out on the feet is going to be pretty big here, because Fernandez, make no mistake about it, she is going to be the better striker. And I just think when you're fading Fernandez, you need to have somebody that's able to implement the wrestling, the takedowns, the grappling. And I don't think Judas can do it personally. So we're going to side with Fernandez here. Fernandez by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Josh Quinlan, a small favorite now at minus 125. The comeback on Adam Fugit is plus 105. And I got to be honest, I don't understand the odds here in general, but also we've seen Quinlan take a little bit of money this week. I disagree, guys. This is another one. I don't agree with the line movement here. I favor Adam Fugit here pretty significantly for a couple reasons. For starters, I've never been super big on Josh Quinlan. You know, he fought on Contender Series a couple years back, ended up popping hot for a drug test, got suspended. Since then, he has not looked the same. He got absolutely embarrassed by Trey Waters as a sizable favorite in his UFC debut, where he just struggled to close distance, really struggled with the range of Trey Waters. And then he followed that up with a performance against Danny Barlow, where he again struggled to get inside his boxing range, took a ton of damage, and got knocked out in the third round. And he also got hurt in the Trey Waters fight, a guy that's not known to have big power. So I worry about the durability. He doesn't have high output on the feet. He's got solid leg kicks, powerful fighter. Most of his wins have come by knockout, but he's not going to put a ton of volume out there. He's not really going to look to grapple. And I think Fugit's the better grappler to begin with. I think Fugit's the better wrestler. He previously wrestled in junior college. And I think on the feet, Fugit's going to be able to use that length to his advantage. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage, which we know is something that Quinlan has struggled with in the past and continues to struggle with at this stage in his career. So I think it's one where on the feet it's going to be competitive, but I trust the output of Fugit more, and I just think he's the more well-rounded fighter. If anybody's going to have grappling success, I think it's going to be him. So I'm going to side with Fugit here. I think he's historically been a little bit underrated in terms of the market, and I think that's happening again here. We're going Fugit by TKO. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Nate Maness, a minus 485 favorite. The comeback on Jimmy the Brick Flick is plus 370. And you guys know I'm a big Jimmy Flick guy. He came through for us in a big way against Malcolm Gordon last time out. I'm always going to root for Jimmy Flick. I think he's exciting. I like his fighting style. I think he's a funny character as well. But I also just naturally am rooting for him in a lot of these spots because he is such a big underdog, and he does provide potential leverage on DraftKings slates like he should in this slate as well, because Maness is a huge favorite. He's very expensive, and the most likely outcome is that Maness hurts him early and probably finishes him. So it's obvious to target Maness, but I also think you're going to have another situation similar to that Weston Wilson fight where the market's not really going to give Flick much of a chance here. And even though I expect him to get knocked out just like everybody else, he does have the type of upside where if he can just force any type of grappling exchange, he can submit you in the blink of an eye. And that goes against basically anybody in the division, but certainly a guy like Maness, who's repeatedly put himself in bad spots in grappling exchanges in the past. So it's going to be one where, similar to that Wilson-Jekasaragi fight, I'm going to have heavy exposure to both sides. You're going to get more leverage on the underdog here, but for good reason. The most likely outcome is going to be Maness by TKO, and that's the official pick. And next up, we have a fun matchup between Tagir Ulanbekov, a minus 230 favorite, with Joshua Van on the comeback at plus 190. And this is one that I went back and forth initially on before I dug into the matchup, because I get on one hand, Tagir Ulanbekov, big grappling advantage you would expect here, gonna pursue the takedowns, dangerous enough with the submission attempts, but he's also not the best striker. He's also at times looked like more of a lay and pray artist than a submission guy. I know he's finished his last couple of opponents, but prior to that, he was known more of just like a lay and pray control type of fighter. And Joshua Van has fought these one-dimensional grappling style of fighters in the past, as recent as his last fight against Felipe Bunes, who he ended up coming through in that fight. So Van is a very young, exciting prospect, continues to improve, but I just think this is clearly the toughest test for him, especially when it comes to the grappling in Ulanbekov here, and I expect that to be the biggest advantage in this fight. So even though I think the market's getting a little bit carried away in terms of the confidence level into Tagir, I do think the grappling is going to be too much for Van to overcome here. So we're going to say Ulanbekov by decision. That's the official pick. Next up, we have Garrett Armfield, a minus 185 favorite. The comeback on Brady Highstand is plus 154. And this is another fun matchup. I expect it to be pretty exciting. Both of these guys like to get in there and throw down, mix in the takedowns as well. We saw that more from Armfield on the regional scene. He hasn't really shown that wrestling ability at the UFC level that much. But Brady Highstand certainly is going to be looking to implement the takedowns. He wrestles at a very high rate, but he kind of needs to, because on the feet, he's an absolute punching bag. I said that back when he fought on The Ultimate Fighter. My opinion hasn't changed, because each time out, he continues to show that he has absolutely zero striking defense. He eats shots nonstop, even in that last fight, which was an amazing comeback, super exciting, dropping the first 2 rounds, getting beat to a pulp, essentially, and then coming back and getting the finish in round 3. It was absolutely electric. But that's the best asset for Highstand. He's very tough, and he's got good cardio, and he's not going to quit. But that can only take you so far when you struggle defensively as much as he does, and now you're facing somebody in Armfield that I think can compete in the wrestling department and will have a clear power advantage on the feet and should be able to land clean. So I like the Armfield side here. I expect Brady to hang around, so it would go 15 minutes, but I think Armfield is going to be doing enough to get his hand raised. We're saying Armfield by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Asu Almabayev, a big favorite at minus 535. The comeback on Jose Johnson is plus 400. Before I talk about the matchup here, keep an eye on weigh-ins for this one specifically, guys, because Jose Johnson is dropping down to 125 here. He has never made 126 pounds, the cutoff for the flyweight division, in his entire career. He fought a couple times at flyweight on the amateur scene, but I believe those were at a catch weight, according to something I read on Twitter. So he's actually never officially made this weight, and we know he's very tall and lanky at 135. So this cut is going to be, you know, if you've seen the guy fight, he doesn't have a ton of body fat on him. At least it doesn't look like it. So definitely keep an eye on weigh-ins here. Assuming that he makes weight, he is going to be pretty big in there. He's going to look a lot taller, a lot longer, and I expect him to try to use that reach and size to his advantage. I just don't think it's going to work against Almabayev here, who's a big favorite. You guys know, if you've heard me in the past, Almabayev is a prospect that I've been excited about since he came into the UFC, and he's proven it every step of the way. You know, 2 straight finishes, very solid, very well-rounded. You talk about his grappling. He's able to get the fight to the ground, dangerous with the submissions, but it's the striking as well. He's very well-rounded, very powerful on the feet. He is capable of hurting you on the feet as well. So I just think against a guy in Jose Johnson, who we know has a long history of putting himself in bad spots during scrambles and grappling exchanges, he's paid the price for that over the course of his career. He's been submitted multiple times on the regional scene. I think if you make a mistake like that against somebody as good as Almabayev, you're going to pay the ultimate price. So we're going Almabayev by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Miles Johns, a -130 favorite to come back on Douglas Silva de Andrade, just +110. And we've seen a little bit of line movement in favor of Miles Johns for this fight. And I tend to agree. You know, I do slightly favor Johns in this matchup. I just think he's a guy who never really lives up to his potential, at least the potential that I thought he would have. You know, coming off the Contender Series, high-level wrestling background, wrestled in college, and just doesn't look to wrestle in the UFC. So I think you can kind of throw that out the window. He basically never looks to wrestle, but his boxing is good as well. And he's shown that he has power. He's landed multiple knockdowns in the UFC. He's just not the greatest finisher. So even though he's able to hurt guys, he doesn't necessarily follow it up that well. And then on the flip side, Douglas Silva de Andrade, he always puts on exciting fights. He's got power in his own right. He's got like 20 career knockouts, ton of power. Don't fully trust the cardio, and I don't fully trust the output because at times he's low volume as well. So this is one where I think it's basically going to come down to who hurts the other first. And I just favor John's durability a little bit more. And Silva de Andrade, you know, he's getting older now, turns 40 years old in just a couple of weeks. So I favor the John side here. I think he gets it done here. We're going Johns by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Timothy Kawamba, a -205 favorite with the comeback on Lucas Almeida at +170. And this is one where I think the market just has it wrong here, because Timothy Kawamba, you know, I don't think should be this big of a favorite against a lot of dudes on the UFC roster, most of them, to be honest with you, and certainly not Lucas Almeida, a guy who I think is clearly more powerful than him, clearly a better submission grappler as well. Kawamba, he's solid. You know, he's a good athlete. He trains in Vegas, solid striking, but he's not like a high volume guy. He's not a big power guy. He's not even a good grappler. You know, he's looked to mix in wrestling on the regional scene, and he's capable of doing it, but he's not a great grappler. And this is a spot where I just think all the upside is on the underdog in Lucas Almeida, who I would expect to be landing the bigger shots, landing more volume as well. And like I said, I think he's actually the better submission grappler as well. So it's one where I think the market is just judging Almeida a little bit too harshly based on his last 2 losses. He got submitted against Pat Sabatini. I'm not going to fault him too much there. And then he got caught against Andre Fili, a powerful guy who's a veteran of the sport. Like, I think both of those guys run through Timothy Kawamba. I think these odds are significantly off, and I like the underdog here, Lucas Almeida. We're going Almeida by decision because I do think Kawamba is tough enough to hang in there, but we're going Almeida to get his hand raised. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event, as Ikram Aliskerov is a -1100 favorite. The comeback on Antonio Tricoli is +700. And this one basically just comes down to, do you want to pay all the way up to Ikram Aliskerov? Because not only is he above that $9,500 threshold, he's $9,700. So he's extremely expensive. There is going to be dogs you can play on this slate, so it's not impossible to get up there. But again, it is a very big price tag to cover. But in terms of the matchup, he's got Tricoli covered pretty much everywhere. He's very explosive on the feet. He's shown that off against Phil Hawes and in his last fight as well with the knockout victory. And he's got the grappling as well. Like, he's got Tricoli covered wherever this fight goes. Tricoli, very low-level fighter, fought on Contender Series back in 2019, ended up failing a drug test, so he didn't make his UFC debut, and then basically just took a few years off from the sport. So he's fought just once since 2019, and I don't think we can expect too much of him. I think he's not a bad fighter, but asking him to come in here and compete with Ikram on short notice is a huge task, and one that I think is going to be too tall for Tricoli here. We're going Ikram by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as Tatsuro Taira comes in as a -185 favorite. The comeback on Alex Perez is +154. And this is another one where I think there's got to be some value on Alex Perez here. He's the veteran. He's got the experience. He has the main event experience as well. He knocked out Mateus Nicolau in a main event just a few months ago. And he's staying more active, which is what we want to see from Alex Perez. That was the biggest knock on him before, is like, oh, he never, he pulls out all these fights. He's a pullout merchant. He doesn't make weight. He gets submitted in the first round, blah, blah, blah. Now he's being active. It seems like he's taking it a lot more seriously, kind of reinventing his career, which you love to see. And I think a guy like Tatsuro Taira, who's very one-dimensional, it's a tough spot against Alex Perez, who's going to be the way better wrestler. We saw him defend takedowns against Muhammad Makayev. Yes, he didn't get much offense off in that fight, but he defended the takedowns and the grappling very well. I expect him to do that here, because the floor is lava. He cannot go to the ground with Tatsuro Taira. He cannot give up his back. Taira, one of the better back takers, and will submit you if you give him the chance. But outside of Taira catching him in a submission, I think this is all Alex Perez here. He's a way better boxer. He's got just as good a leg kicks as Taira. And Taira really struggles defensively on the feet as well. And I think over 5 rounds, being the first time that he's had to go 25 minutes if the fight gets there, I mean, so many of these things point to Alex Perez here. Just has to avoid getting submitted, and probably just getting submitted early is what he has to avoid. So I think he does that here, putting my faith in Alex Perez, which is never a very comforting thing, but I think it's the right decision here. We're going Perez by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. Got a ton of other content up at Fight Numbers. Check it out. I appreciate it. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next week.